Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The desert outside Redrock Flats, New Mexico, 1871. The sun had no mercy. It never did. It hung in the white sky like a brand iron, burning everything beneath it without shame or apology. The Red Canyon walls stood tall on either side of the dry basin, ancient and silent, watching what men did to women they no longer wanted. Zara Whitfield could feel the heat radiating up from the cracked earth beneath her chin. She could feel the weight of packed dirt pressing against her shoulders, her chest, her legs. She could not move, she could not run, she could only breathe, and even that felt borrowed. Her dark hair hung in dusty ropes across her sunburned face. Her brown eyes, once bright with hope, stared out across the flat, empty land and saw nothing coming. No rider, no rescue, no cloud. Just the wind lifting little red spirals of dust and carrying them away, free in a way she no longer was. She had been buried to her neck in the earth since morning. And the morning felt like a lifetime ago. The people who had done this were already gone. Her husband's family, the Whitfields of Redrock Flats, cattle ranchers, churchgoers, respected folk. They had come out here before sunrise, 6 of them, with shovels and silence and the cold decision already made in their eyes. Her mother-in-law, Dorothea Whitfield, had spoken the sentence like a preacher reads scripture, flat, certain, unquestionable. You have given this family nothing. 3 years and no child. You are a dry well girl, and dry wells get filled in. Then they dug the hole. They put Zara in it standing up. They packed the dirt around her, tamped it with their boot heels, and they walked away without a single backward glance. Her husband, Colt Whitfield, had stood at the edge and watched. He had said nothing, not one word, not her name, not a protest. He had just watched, then turned his horse east and ridden toward town like a man who had finished a chore. That was the moment that broke something inside Zara deeper than the dirt ever could. Now the sun climbed higher. The buzzards began to circle. She could see them up there, lazy black shapes tilting against the white sky, patient in the way that only creatures who feed on death can afford to be. Zara could feel her lips cracking. Her throat was a strip of dry leather. The dirt pressed against her ribs with every breath, making each inhale a small fight. She focused on the horizon because that was the only thing she could do. She had no water, no shade, no voice loud enough to reach anyone. The nearest ranch was 4 miles east. The nearest town was 7 miles south. She had calculated this in her mind, because her mind was the only part of her that was still free. She thought about her mother back in Tucson, who had warned her about the Whitfields. She thought about the little yellow dress she had sewn by hand the year before, hoping, praying. She thought about the empty cradle in the corner of the bedroom that Colt had built with his own hands and then refused to look at. She did not cry. She was too dry for tears. She simply breathed and stared and waited for whatever the desert decided to send her. She almost missed him. The shape on the horizon was small at first, just a dark smudge against the red and gold landscape, the kind of thing you dismiss as a rock or a scrub bush until it moves. But it moved. It moved with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a horse being walked carefully across broken ground. Zara blinked the dust from her eyes and stared hard. One rider. One horse. Coming from the northwest, from the direction of the canyon country where the Apache settlements were tucked into the rock formations like secrets. She did not call out. Her voice was barely more than a whisper now. She simply watched and measured every second like a coin she could not afford to waste. The rider came closer. She could make out details. A broad-shouldered man, dark-skinned and straight-backed, wearing a faded work shirt and trail-worn leather breeches. No cavalry uniform, no preacher's collar, no rancher's hat. He rode like the land belonged to him, easy and unhurried. Then his horse stopped. The man went still in the saddle, and even from 50 yards away, Zara could see the exact moment he spotted what the earth was wearing. A woman's head, sitting alone in the middle of the desert floor like something left behind by a nightmare. He came to her at a canter. His horse, a paint mare with one white ear, pulled up 6 feet away and blew hard through her nostrils, smelling the fear and the sun on Zara's skin. The man swung down from the saddle in one smooth motion and crouched in front of her, putting himself at eye level without a word. He was perhaps 35, with a square jaw, deep-set black eyes, and the kind of face that had been shaped by years of weather and grief in equal measure. He looked at her the way a man looks at a wound, not with disgust, not with pity, but with the focused, practical attention of someone who intends to do something about it. He studied the packed earth around her neck. He studied her face. He studied the buzzards. Then he said 4 words, his voice low and unhurried as the canyon wind. "How long you been?" Zara swallowed dust and answered with the only truth she had. "Since before the sun." The man nodded once, like this was information he could work with. Then he stood, walked to his saddlebag, and pulled out a short-handled camp shovel. He did not ask permission. He did not ask what happened. He simply began to dig. And for the first time since morning, Zara believed she might live. His name was Elon Running Water, and he did not talk much. That was the first thing Zara learned about him. He dug her out in steady, methodical strokes, working around her carefully so the collapsing earth would not crush her legs. And when she finally came free of the ground, he caught her before she fell and set her down on a flat rock like something fragile and important. He gave her water from his canteen, just small sips, the way you water a plant that has gone too long without, slowly, so the roots can hold it. He did not ask questions while she drank. He sat nearby and watched the canyon rim, his rifle resting across his knees, scanning the distance with the calm alertness of a man who had survived by paying attention to the world around him. Zara watched him from behind the canteen rim and thought that she had never seen a man sit so still. Colt Whitfield was always moving, always loud, always filling rooms with himself. This man was different. He occupied space the way a tree does. Rooted, quiet, present. When she finally lowered the canteen, he looked at her directly and asked only one thing. "Can you ride?" She said she could. He helped her onto the paint mare without ceremony, mounted behind her and turned the horse northwest toward the canyon country. She did not ask where he was taking her. She was too tired, and something in his manner, not warmth exactly but steadiness, told her she was not in danger. Her mind drifted as the horse moved, and she found herself sliding back through time without meaning to, back to the beginning of how she had ended up with her head in the dirt of a New Mexico desert. She had married Colt Whitfield 2 months after her 22nd birthday, in the spring of 1868. She had come to Redrock Flats from Tucson with her mother's blessing and her father's silence. Her father had never approved of anything she did and had stopped trying to hide it by the time she turned 15. Colt was handsome in a raw, sun-bleached way, and he had a good ranch and a clear ambition. And in those years, for a woman without much family wealth behind her, ambition in a husband counted for a great deal. The wedding had been simple. The reception had been loud and full of Whitfield cousins. Dorothea, her mother-in-law, had kissed her cheek at the altar and said, smiling wide, "Give us grandbabies, sweetheart, and you'll always have a home here." Zara had smiled back and believed her, the way you believe a blue sky before you learn what storms look like. The first year passed with happiness thin enough to see through but warm enough to feel. Colt worked the cattle, Zara kept the house, tended the kitchen garden, and waited for her body to announce the thing everyone was waiting for. The second year, the waiting became a silence, with weight to it. Dorothea's visits grew longer and more pointed. She would sit at Zara's kitchen table drinking coffee and make observations that weren't quite accusations, about women she knew who had fallen pregnant easily, about the importance of sons for carrying a ranch forward, about how a man's legacy lived or died in his children. Zara would nod and refill the coffee and carry the words home inside her chest where they sat like stones. By the third year, the silence between her and Colt had grown its own architecture. He stopped reaching for her hand. He stopped asking about her days. He spent more evenings at the bunkhouse with the hired men, coming back smelling of tobacco and distance. And Zara began to understand that she was being measured against a standard she had never been told about and had no power to meet. She had ridden to the doctor in Redrock Flats twice, both times alone, both times telling no one. Dr. Harlan Price was a thin, nervous man with ink-stained fingers who seemed uncomfortable in the presence of women's bodies and their failures. The first visit he told her to rest more and eat well. The second visit he delivered his verdict with the detached efficiency of a man reading a land deed. She had what he called a constitution unsuited to childbearing. He said it like a weather report, like it was simply a fact of nature, nothing to be done about it, move along. Zara had ridden home in the August heat with that sentence sitting on her chest, heavier than any piece of saddle leather. She had not told Colt immediately. She had carried it for 3 weeks, trying to find the right words, the right moment, the right angle from which such a thing could be said and received with kindness. She had been foolish enough to believe that the right moment existed. When she finally told him, on a Tuesday evening, while he cleaned his rifle at the kitchen table, he had said nothing for a long time. Then he set the rifle down, walked outside, and did not come back until the following morning. It was 1 week after that conversation that Dorothea arrived with the shovels. Zara had not connected the two events until she was already standing in the hole they dug. She had actually believed, even in those last moments, that Colt would say something, would step forward, would remember the spring of 1868 and the blue sky and the promises he had made in front of a preacher and God and every Whitfield cousin who had ever drawn breath. He had not, and now she was riding northwest on a paint mare with a stranger's chest warm against her back, the desert falling away behind her, the canyon walls rising ahead, and she was beginning the slow, disorienting work of understanding that the life she had known was completely, irrevocably gone. Ellen's horse moved steadily beneath them. Above, the buzzards had given up and drifted elsewhere. The sky was turning the pale gold of late afternoon. And somewhere in the coming canyon country, Zara was about to discover that an ending can look, from certain angles, exactly like a beginning. The Apache settlement at Saya Canyon was not what Zara expected. She had grown up hearing stories everyone in the Southwest had the kind of stories told around fires and dinner tables by people who had never once set foot in an Apache camp and had no intention of starting. She had expected something frightening, something foreign, something that would confirm the fear she had been handed since childhood. What she found instead was a cluster of well-made structures built into the natural shelter of the canyon walls, with cook fires and the smell of roasting meat and children's voices bouncing off the red rock. Horses moved in a rope corral near a stream that caught the last of the evening sun and threw it back in gold pieces. Women worked near the fires, moving with the efficient quiet of people who have no time to waste. A few older men sat talking near the largest structure. Nobody ran, nobody screamed, nobody reached for a weapon. They looked at Zara the way you look at any unexpected thing that arrives with someone you know. Cautious, curious, withholding judgment. Alon guided the paint mare to the corral and dismounted, then helped Zara down without ceremony. A small boy came running first. He was perhaps 7 years old, with black hair sticking up in every direction and a long tear in the knee of his trousers. He ran directly at Ilan and grabbed him around the waist with both arms and buried his face in his father's stomach. Ilan put one large hand on the boy's head and held it there, and something moved across his face for just a moment, something private and profound before it settled back into steadiness. Chato, he said quietly. 3 more children materialized from different directions within the next 30 seconds. A girl of about 10 with Elan's same dark, measuring eyes. Twin boys, younger, maybe 5, who arrived holding hands and stopped at a cautious distance when they saw Zara, their small faces solemn and evaluating. Elan said something in Apache to the girl, who straightened slightly and then looked at Zara with the careful gravity of a child who has been required to grow up faster than is fair. "He says you are hurt and you need water and a place to rest," the girl translated in accented but clear English. "I am Nali. I will take you." Zara looked at this 10-year-old girl standing in the firelight with the composure of a woman twice her age and felt something crack open in her chest that she could not name. Nali took her to a small structure near the canyon wall, separate from the main cluster, with a low doorway and a packed dirt floor and a sleeping mat that smelled of pine and dry grass. She brought water in a clay pot, and then she brought a small bowl of food, some kind of stew, thick with meat and wild onion, and she set it down and stood back and watched Zara eat with those serious, dark eyes of hers. Zara ate slowly, tasting nothing at first, then gradually tasting everything, her body waking up from the shock of the day and demanding to be fed. When the bowl was empty, Nali took it without being asked. She paused at the doorway and said, not unkindly but with the plainness of a child who has no patience for softness, "My mother died 14 months ago. The little ones still cry at night sometimes. My father does not sleep much." Then she ducked through the doorway and was gone, leaving that information in the room like a stone dropped into still water, the ring spreading in silence. Zara sat with it. She sat with the day, all of it, the shovels and the dirt and the buzzards and the canyon, and this girl with her mother's absence written in every careful move she made. Outside, she could hear the settlement settling into its evening rhythm. The fire sounds, the low voices, the twins laughing at something sudden and brief. She could hear the stream. She could hear, if she listened closely, a man's voice speaking quietly to a horse in the corral, patient and low, and she knew by the cadence that it was Elin. She did not know what to make of him. She had been around enough men to have learned the grammar of them, the way they announced themselves, the way they positioned themselves in relation to women, the way they decided things and expected gratitude for the deciding. Elon spoke a different grammar. He had dug her out of the ground and put her on his horse and brought her to safety, and had asked almost nothing. He had not explained himself. He had not told her what he expected. He had simply acted with the economy of a man who does not see the point in performing his own goodness. This was, Zara was slowly realizing, an unusual and somewhat destabilizing quality in a person. She lay down on the sleeping mat as the canyon went dark and the stars came out overhead in numbers she had never seen from the Whitfield ranch. She stared up through the low doorway at the black sky packed with light and made herself face what was true. She had no home, no husband, no family that would claim her. She had the clothes she was buried in, a gray work dress now ruined with red dirt, and a pair of cracked leather boots. She had the coin she always kept in her left boot for emergencies, an old habit her father had taught her before he stopped talking to her, which was perhaps the most useful thing he ever gave her. She was alive. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. Tomorrow she would need to figure out what to do with the alive, but tonight she was warm and fed and no longer in the ground, and somewhere a few yards away there were 4 children who had lost their mother 14 months ago, and a man who did not sleep much, and a paint mare who had carried her away from the worst day of her life without complaint. Zara closed her eyes. She did not sleep easily, but she slept. 3 days passed before Ellen spoke more than 10 words to her in a single conversation. Zara spent those days resting, observing, and finding small ways to be useful, habits she could no more switch off than she could stop breathing. On the first morning, she helped Nali carry water from the stream. On the second, she repaired the torn knee of Chato's trousers with a needle and sinew thread that Nali produced from a small bag with quiet efficiency. On the third, she helped the settlement women prepare a large communal meal, working beside them in silence, understanding from the way they positioned themselves and handled the food what needed doing even when the language was a wall between them. The women watched her with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. One older woman, broad-shouldered and iron-haired with a face that seemed to have been carved directly from the canyon wall, watched her longest and said nothing at all. Nali told her later that this woman was called Daha, and that she was something between a grandmother and a leader to the settlement, and that her silence means she hasn't decided about you yet, which is better than if she had. Zara took this information seriously. The twins were named Kio and Sela, And they had discovered her on the second day with the sudden, absolute trust of very small children who have not yet learned the fear that comes with thinking. They simply appeared beside her while she was sitting near the stream, sat down without invitation, and Kyo immediately handed her a small rock with the solemnity of a man presenting a gift of great value. She accepted it with equal solemnity. By afternoon, they were showing her things: a feather, a beetle, a curved piece of wood Sella claimed was a horse, but which Zara could see was probably once a spoon handle. She admired everything with the focused attention they demanded. The twins made sounds that might have been words, and might have been something else entirely, and Nolly explained later that they had been slow to talk since their mother died, and that the settlement doctor, an old man who dealt in herbs and ceremony, had said time would fix it. They talk to each other, Nolly said. They just don't talk much to anyone else. Zara watched Kyo take Selah's hand and walk away toward the corral and thought she understood this impulse perfectly. Chado was the most complicated of the four. He was 7 and had apparently decided early in his grieving process that he would fill his mother's absence by becoming a small adult, which meant he worked hard, complained little, and watched everything with an intensity that was unsettling in a child. He helped his father without being asked. He herded the twins away from danger. He chopped kindling with a hatchet that was almost too big for his hands, his face set in a permanent expression of concentration. But occasionally Zara would catch him in an unguarded moment standing alone near the canyon wall, looking at nothing, his hands loose at his sides and his face completely open in a way he never allowed when he knew someone was watching. In those moments he looked exactly what he was, a 7-year-old boy who wanted his mother and had nowhere to put the wanting. She did not intrude on these moments. She simply noted them and carried them carefully, the way you carry something fragile. Elon himself was harder to read than any of his children. He was present in the way of a man who takes his responsibilities seriously. She could see the children watch for him, orient around him, settle when he was near. He fed the horses morning and evening with the same focused care. He repaired a section of the canyon wall structure that had cracked, working alone for most of a morning with the kind of patience that comes from believing the work itself is the point. He spoke to the other men in Apache in low, deliberate sentences. He watched the canyon rim at intervals, the way a man does when he is expecting trouble or has learned to expect it so consistently that the habit has become automatic. He had not asked Zara again what had happened to her. She noticed this. She could not decide if it was respect or indifference or something else entirely, some third quality she did not have language for yet. On the third evening, after the children were sleeping, Elon appeared at the edge of the firelight and sat down across from her without ceremony, the way he seemed to do everything. He poured 2 cups of something from a clay pot and set one in front of her. She drank it. It was bitter and dark and warming. They sat in silence for a while, which was not uncomfortable in the way silences with Colt had always been loaded and threatening. This silence was simply quiet. Then Elon said, looking at the fire rather than at her, "In 3 days you have made my daughter laugh twice, and my sons have brought you 6 rocks and a beetle. These are significant numbers." It was the most he had said to her since he found her in the desert, and there was nothing in his voice that was joking, but there was something in it, dry and careful and real, that made Zara look up. "What does that mean?" she asked. He considered the fire for a moment. "It means they are beginning to trust you," he said. "They do not do this easily anymore." He said nothing else. He finished his drink, nodded once, and went inside. Zara sat alone with the fire in the canyon dark and the quiet weight of what had just been given to her, which was, she was beginning to understand, nothing less than the beginning of being seen. Word traveled fast in the desert. Always had. There was something about the openness of the land, the way sound carried in dry air, the way riders could be seen from miles away, the way small settlements and ranches and trading posts existed in an invisible web of information that meant privacy was always temporary and news was always moving. Zara had been in the canyon 10 days when Nolly came to her in the early morning, with her face arranged in the careful neutrality she used when she was trying not to show alarm. She said simply, 2 white men came to the canyon entrance yesterday evening while you were sleeping. They spoke to my father. I did not hear what was said, but my father's face was the way it gets before something difficult. Zara set down the water jug she was carrying and looked at the girl. Did they give names? Nolly shook her head, but she described them: one tall and narrow with a cavalry-style hat, one shorter with a red beard and a brand-new gun belt. Zara did not need names. The tall one was Colt's cousin, a man called Ferris Whitfield, who served as the family's instrument whenever their business required something harder than manners. The Redbeard was likely a hired man. The Whitfields had sent someone to find out if she had survived. She found Elon at the corral, checking the paint mare's rear left hoof with the focused attention he gave everything. She stood at the rail fence and waited until he set the hoof down and straightened. Then she told him the truth. All of it. Would Colt Whitfield. The 3 years, the doctor's verdict, Dorothea's sentence, the shovels. She told him in plain, level language without softening or dramatizing, the way you relay information that is too large for decoration. Elon listened without moving. He had a quality of stillness that made you feel heard in a way that reactions and expressions often did not, like the listening was absolute, was going all the way down. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at the mare. Then he said, "The men who came, they are looking for you." It was not a question. She said yes. He said, "What do you want to do?" She had not expected that question. In her experience, men decided things and then told you what had been decided. She looked at him across the fence rail and said slowly, "I want to stay, if that's something that is possible here." Elon looked at her with those steady, dark eyes. "It is possible," he said. Then he went back to the mares. Hooves. The men came back the next morning, this time to the settlement itself, and this time Ferris Whitfield did not bother with politeness. He rode in with his red-bearded companion and 3 other riders, 4 armed men total, and stopped in the center of the settlement with the practiced ease of a man who believes his authority travels with him wherever he goes. The settlement went quiet. The children disappeared like birds off a wire. The women moved back. The older men watched from the canyon wall with expressionless faces. Ferris was perhaps 40, lean-faced and pale under his trail dust, with pale eyes that moved across things the way a wolf's do, assessing, calculating, looking for the weak point. He called out into the settlement's silence, his voice carrying easily off the canyon walls. "We know she's here. Woman named Zara Whitfield, property of the Whitfield family of Redrock Flats. She's been found alive, which creates a legal matter that needs resolving." The word property fell into the canyon air and echoed. Zara heard it from inside the doorway where she was standing. She felt it like a boot pressing on the back of her neck, driving her back toward the ground. Elon walked out from the corral with the camp shovel in his hand. He did not carry it like a weapon. He simply had not set it down, but the presence of it changed the air. He walked to within 10 feet of Ferris Whitfield's horse and stopped, and there was something in how he moved, in the particular economy and directness of it, that made the 4 riders shift in their saddles. Ellen looked up at Ferris with no hurry and no fear and said, "There is no woman named Whitfield here." Ferris narrowed his pale eyes. "Don't play games, Injun. We tracked her from the place she was found, and she was found 3 miles from here." Ellen said, "A woman was dying in the desert. I brought her here. She has no name that belongs to your family. Names belong to the people who carry them, and she is done carrying that one." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes either violence or retreat, and it hung in the canyon for a full count of 10. Ferris looked at the settlement, the old men on the wall, the women at the edge of the space, Elon standing with his shovel and his absolute steadiness, and made a calculation. He wheeled his horse. "This isn't finished," he said. "Tell her the family knows she lived." He rode out. The others followed. The canyon exhaled. Daha, the iron-haired woman who had watched Zara in silence for 10 days, came and stood beside her in the doorway. She said something in Apache that Nolly, appearing from behind the structure, translated without being asked. She says, "A woman who has been buried can never be buried again." She says, "Now you know what you are made of." Zara looked at the canyon entrance where the dust of 5 horses was still settling in the morning air. She looked at Nali's serious face and the twins peering around the corner, and Chado standing straight and quiet near the fire with his hatchet in his hand, ready, in the way he always made himself ready. She looked at Alan, who was leaning on his shovel and watching the canyon entrance with the calm attention of a man making sure a storm has truly passed. Something moved in her, not relief, not triumph, something older and quieter, something that felt, cautiously, like she had a place to stand. The days began to take on a shape. Mornings belonged to water and fire and the animal care that a working settlement requires without interruption. Middays belonged to work. The women's work of preparing and preserving and maintaining, which Zara entered gradually and carefully, learning by watching before attempting, making mistakes with honest apologies, and learning from the corrections she was given. Afternoons sometimes softened into teaching. Nali taught her Apache words with the systematic thoroughness of a child who has decided this is a project worth completing, and in return, Zara taught Nali the finer points of embroidery, which Nali accepted with the pragmatic interest of someone cataloging a useful skill. The twins orbited her in their silent, companionable way, still bringing her objects. The collection on the ledge beside her sleeping mat, now numbering 14 rocks, 2 feathers, a piece of blue glass, and a very small dried flower, that Sela had presented with such gravity that Zara had nearly come apart with it. Chato maintained his careful distance, watching her from the edges of things, his expression giving nothing away. She did not push him. She waited with the patience she was learning from the desert itself. The other women were a landscape of varying reception. Some had accepted her with the matter-of-fact hospitality of people who make pragmatic peace with what arrives. Others maintained a watchful reserve that she respected and did not try to breach. One woman, younger, perhaps 20, named Lena, who had a baby on her back and sharp eyes and no patience for anything she considered false, had tested her on the 8th day by asking directly, in the half-English she used for practical communication, "Why do white women come here? Always something has broken them. What broke you?" Zara had looked at her steadily and said, "They buried me in the ground for something my body couldn't do." Lena had studied her face for a long moment, looking for the performance in it. Then she had shifted the baby on her back and handed Zara a basket to carry. That had been, as best Zara could interpret it, an acceptance of terms. The Whitfield men did not return in the 2nd week or the 3rd, but Zara did not make the mistake of believing they were finished. Ferris Whitfield was not a man who abandoned a problem. He was a man who changed his approach. She thought about this in the quiet hours, turning it over, trying to see the angles. The Whitfields had buried her, expecting to leave no trace. The existence of a living Zara Whitfield was a complication, not because they loved her, but because she was a liability, a woman who could, in theory, describe what had been done to her, who had been done to her, and when. In 1871 New Mexico, the odds of a court believing her over a respected ranching family were not good. But not good was not the same as impossible, and men like Ferris understood the difference. He would be back. She needed to be ready for something, though she did not yet know exactly what form that readiness should take. Elan seemed aware of this calculation without her having shared it. He had begun varying his patterns, different times at the corral, different routes when he rode out to check the canyon approaches. Small things, careful things. She noticed them and added them to what she was building in her mind, the growing inventory of what this man was. He was methodical. He was patient. He was not performing strength. He simply had it, the kind that comes from having been tested and not broken, from having lost something you could not replace and finding a way to keep working anyway. She had learned, gradually and in pieces, that his wife Amaya had died of fever 14 months ago, quickly and without much warning, leaving him with 4 children ranging from 5 to 10 years old, and a grief that he wore the way he wore his work clothes, practically without display, putting it on every morning because there was no alternative and it needed bearing. She understood this. She had worn her own grief the same way for 3 years in the Whitfield house, where showing it would have been used against her. One evening, near the end of the 3rd week, Chato appeared beside her while she was sitting outside watching the canyon colors shift toward purple. He sat down without announcement 3 feet away and looked at the canyon wall. They sat in silence for several minutes. Then he said in his small, careful voice, "My mother used to say the canyon walls remember everything that happens in front of them." Zara considered this. "Do you think that's true?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the ancient red rock. "I think it might be," he said. "I think they remember her." Zara did not say anything. She sat with him and looked at the canyon walls and let them remember. After a while, Chato moved 3 feet closer. He did not close the last distance, but he moved, and Zara held that movement in her chest carefully, the way you hold something that has been offered freely and therefore means more than anything demanded could ever mean. It was Nali who said it first, which surprised Zara only slightly. Nali was the kind of child who looked at the world with such clear, unsparing eyes that she often arrived at truths before the adults around her had finished building their defenses against them. They were sitting by the stream on a late afternoon, Zara washing a dress, and Nali sitting on a rock with her knees pulled to her chest, watching the water. The twins were downstream, building something complex and wordless with sticks and mud. Chato was at the corral. Elin was somewhere in the canyon, scouting the eastern approach. Nali said, without preamble and without looking up from the water, "My father is less sad since you came." Zara stopped moving her hands in the water. She looked at the back of Nali's head. Nali continued, "He still misses my mother. He will always miss her. But before you came, there was a kind of quiet in him that was not peaceful. It was heavy. You can tell the difference between quiet that is resting and quiet that is carrying too much. His was carrying too much." She paused. "It is less heavy now." Zara did not know what to do with this. She started moving her hands again, slow and careful. "Nali," she said, "I am not here to replace your mother." Nali. "My mother was my mother. That does not. My mother was my mother. That does not change. But my father is also a man who is alone, and alone does not suit him. Not because he is weak, but because he was built for giving himself to people and having people to give himself to. You can see it in how he is with us. He is too full of that kind of love to keep it only in 4 places. It was always going to need more room." This was, Zara thought, the most she had ever been told about a man's interior life, and it had been delivered by a 10-year-old girl sitting on a rock by a stream in an Apache canyon. She wrung out the dress and did not speak for a while. Then she said, carefully, "You're very much like him, aren't you?" Nali considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "I think so," she said. "I think that is probably a useful thing to be." Ilan came back from the eastern approach that evening with information that changed the temperature of everything. He gathered the older men near the large fire and spoke to them in Apache for a long time, his voice low and even. Zara watched from the edge of the gathering, reading the body language of the men around him, the shift from relaxed to alert, the straightening of spines, the exchanged glances. When the gathering broke up, Elan came to where she was standing. He said without softening it, "There are 6 riders camped in the eastern canyon mouth. They have been there 2 days. They have a paper. I could not read it, but the way they carried it tells me it is legal. Ferris Whitfield has found a way to make this official." Zara felt the ground shift slightly under her feet. "What kind of official?" she asked. Elin said, "In this territory, a woman who abandons her husband and flees to an Indian settlement, the law will be framed that way. It gives him a reason to enter this canyon with authority behind him." The word abandoned sat between them, turning slowly, exposing the particular obscenity of it, the way a system could turn a woman's survival into her crime. "I will not go back," she said. Her voice was flat and final, and she meant it the way you mean the earth beneath your feet. Ellen looked at her and said, "No, just that." One word, carrying a weight she had not heard in a man's voice directed at her in a very long time, the weight of standing between someone and what wants to harm them. "But we need to think clearly," he continued. "6 men with a legal paper are a different problem than 5 men with just an opinion. We need to make this harder for them." He paused for a moment, looking at the fire, and she could see something working in him, a decision being weighed, measured, turned over in the careful way he handled every serious thing. When he looked back at her, his face was composed in a new way, stripped of the distance he usually maintained. "There is one way to make your position here unassailable," he said. "Under Apache custom and under territorial law, a man's wife has a claim to his protection and his home. I would not ask you to—" He stopped. Started again. "I am asking, not from obligation, from something more honest than that." The fire crackled. The canyon held its breath. Zara looked at this man. This steady, unperforming, grief-carrying man with his 4 children and his paint mare and his 1 camp shovel, and took the full measure of the moment. She said, "I will need time to answer that." He nodded immediately, like this was exactly right, like he would have been alarmed if she had said anything else. "Take the time," he said. He went to tend the fire. She stood in the canyon dark and looked at the stars and felt the full, impossible weight of where she was, running from a legal system designed against her. Ferocity that frightened her, with its ferocity that frightened her with its speed. She was standing at a crossroads that no map she had ever been given showed. But she had also been buried in the ground, and dug out, and carried to safety. And something about that sequence of events had burned away certain confusions about what mattered and what did not. She stood in the dark for a long time. Then she went to her sleeping mat and lay down and began, very deliberately, to think. She gave him her answer the following morning, before the settlement was fully awake, while the canyon was still purple with the last of the night, and only the horses were moving. She found him at the corral, which was where she always found him in the early hours, and she stood at the fence rail and said, "Yes, on 2 conditions." He turned from the horses and waited. "First condition, this is a real arrangement between equals, not a legal maneuver that expires when the danger does. I will not be used, and I will not be a burden. I will carry my share of everything this life requires." He nodded. "Second condition. Nali teaches me Apache, and I learn it properly. I will not live in this place speaking only the language of people who tried to kill me." Something moved across Elon's face, that rare, controlled thing that was not quite a smile but occupied the same territory. He said, "Those are good conditions." She said, "I thought so." He extended his hand across the fence rail, and she took it, and they shook hands the way 2 people do who are making an agreement they intend to keep. The Apache ceremony was simple and honest, and conducted by the same old man who had pronounced on the twins' speech, a dried and serious figure named Onovi, who seemed to take the universe's business very personally. He spoke in Apache over a fire while the settlement gathered. In the early morning cold, and Nali translated quietly at Zara's elbow. Not all of it, just the pieces she deemed essential. He says, "A union made from need is not less than one made from ease." He says, "2 people who have both been broken by the world and chosen to stand up again are matched in the only way that truly counts." The twins held Zara's hands on either side of her, Keo on the left and Sella on the right, their small, warm grips absolute and unconscious. Chato stood next to his father, straight and unsmiling, but when Zara glanced at him at the moment Honovi pronounced the joining complete, she caught him. Just for a half-second before he corrected it, looking at her with something that was nakedly, achingly hopeful. She turned away before he could see that she had seen. Some things are too tender to be witnessed directly. Daha came to her after, the iron-haired woman, and pressed both of her large, calloused hands around one of Zara's and said something in Apache that Nali did not translate immediately. Zara looked at her. What did she say? Nali was quiet for a moment, choosing words. She said, You were put in the ground to end. Instead, you grew. This is not common. This is worth something. Zara held Daha's hands and felt the canyon around her, the red walls and the stream and the smoke of the fires and the sounds of this morning. This particular morning, and she thought, I am alive. I am standing. I am here. These were not small things. These were, in fact, the only things. Ferris Whitfield came with his 6 riders and his legal paper on the 4th day after the ceremony, late morning, when the sun was high and the canyon was fully lit and there was nowhere for shadow to hide. He rode in with the confidence of a man who has the law in his pocket, and he called out his demands in the same carrying voice, and this time he had a man with him who was not a hired gun, but something worse, a territory clerk, pale and sweating, in his formal coat, holding a document with an official seal. Ferris addressed the settlement with the legal language he had clearly been coached on. About a woman lawfully wed and not yet divorced. About property and jurisdiction and the rights of the Whitfield family under territorial statute. Then Elin walked out, and beside him walked Zara, and Zara had Hanovi on her left and Daha on her right, and 4 children arranged behind her, and she looked at Ferris Whitfield across the sunlit space of the canyon and felt, for the first time in 4 years, absolutely and completely unafraid. Elin spoke clearly and without performance. The woman you are describing does not exist in this canyon. The woman in this canyon is Zara Running Water, joined to me 4 days ago under Apache custom, witnessed by this settlement. Any document claiming otherwise describes a person who is gone. The clerk blinked and consulted his paper and began to say something about territorial precedent and the validity of Apache custom in legal proceedings, and Elan listened to this completely and then said, with the dry precision of a man who has done his preparation, I have a document as well. He produced a folded paper from inside his shirt, a letter from the territorial judge in Santa Fe, a man named Hargrove who had dealt fairly with the Apache settlement on 2 previous land matters, and who had, when presented with the facts of this case 3 days ago by a fast rider and a carefully written account, provided a written statement that Apache customary unions were recognized under current territorial policy in New Mexico, and that a woman who had been a victim of criminal abandonment and attempted murder retained full rights of self-determination under her new identity. Ferris Whitfield's pale eyes read the signature at the bottom of that letter, and for the first time in the encounter, he had nothing to say. Ferris left the canyon without his woman and without his dignity, and those were the 2 things he could not forgive. He rode back to Redrock Flats, and he told Colt what had happened, and he told Dorothea, and the 3 of them sat in the Whitfield parlor and breathed the particular air of people who have been publicly defied and are deciding what to do about it. Colt, by most accounts, by the account of the bunkhouse men who talked, because bunkhouse men always talk, had gone pale and quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. Dorothea had been the one to speak, and what she said was brief and cold and final. Then we make it so she has nothing to come back to. What this meant, in practical terms, was a campaign conducted through the territorial social machinery, the kind of war that leaves no bullet holes. Rumors sent to the Santa Fe judge's office, letters to the territorial administration questioning the validity of the Apache settlement's land claims, a formal complaint filed against the settlement for harboring a white woman against her will, paper weapons, deployed by people who knew how to use them, aimed at destroying not Zara specifically, but the ground she was standing on. The settlement received the first formal notice from the territory 2 weeks later, a request for documentation of their land claims and settlement authority, citing a complaint of uncertain origin. Elan read it twice at the fire that night and then told the settlement elders what it contained and what he believed it meant. The council sat in the canyon quiet and discussed it with the deliberate thoroughness of people who have survived by not underestimating threats. Zara sat at the edge of the council, not as a member, but as someone affected, listening with the full attention she had learned from months of watching Elan. She understood what she was seeing. The Whitfield family had simply changed weapons. They could not reach her with their hands, so they were reaching her with their system. The same system that had made a wife a property. the same system that had looked away while a woman was buried in the ground. She felt a cold, clear anger rise in her that was different from grief or fear, steadier, more useful. She made a decision. She told Elan that night, and Elan listened with his full stillness. "I need to go to Santa Fe," she said. "Not to run, to be present, to put my face in the room where decisions are being made and make them look at me while they make them." Elan said, "The children," she said. "Nali is more capable than most adults I have known. Daha will not let them go hungry or unguarded. I will be back in 2 weeks." He looked at her for a long moment. "I go with you," he said. She had not expected this, and she did not argue with it. "Then we leave at first light," she said. They rode out of the canyon the following morning, the two of them and the paint mare and a second horse, into the gold and amber of the early desert, heading north and east, toward Santa Fe with the canyon at their backs and whatever was coming ahead of them, riding toward it together in the direct and deliberate way they seemed to do everything, without performance, without flinching, into the hard, bright light. Santa Fe was loud and crowded and smelled of horse and commerce and the particular human density of a territorial capital that was growing faster than its manners. Zara had not been in a city of this size in years, and the noise of it pressed on her after months of canyon quiet. But she had learned something in those months about holding her center when things around her were chaotic, and she walked through the streets of Santa Fe beside Elan with her back straight and her eyes forward. They went first to Judge Hargrove's office, where a clerk informed them that the judge was occupied with pending business and could not see them without appointment. Zara asked for a pen and paper and wrote a note which she handed to the clerk, and the note contained 4 sentences: her name, what had been done to her, the name of the family responsible, and the observation that she had ridden 7 days to put her face in this city because she had learned that invisible people are easy to erase, and she intended to stop being invisible. The clerk disappeared with the note. They waited in the hallway for 20 minutes. Then the clerk came back and said the judge would see them. Hargrove was a heavy man in his 50s, with the weary but functional decency of a person who has spent decades navigating between power and justice and has not fully sold himself to either. He listened to Zara for 30 minutes without interrupting. He looked at the document Elan produced confirming the Canyon land claim's legitimacy, and at the letter from Honovi regarding the ceremony. He read the Whitfield complaint that had been filed with his office, and he looked at Zara's face while he read it. When he set it down, he said, "Mrs. Runningwater, you understand that the Whitfield family carries significant weight in this territory." Zara said, "I understand that they buried me alive and then filed legal paperwork when I didn't stay buried. I would like you to understand both of those things equally." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his pen. Judge Hargrove's ruling came down 10 days after their meeting in Santa Fe, and it was written in the careful, measured language of a man who has calibrated exactly how far he can go within a system and has decided to go that far and not an inch less. The Whitfield complaint against the Apache settlement was dismissed for lack of evidentiary foundation. The settlement's land claim was formally confirmed under territorial authority. The matter of Zara Whitfield, now Zara Runningwater, legally recognized under the judge's written order, was declared resolved. She was a free woman under her new name with full rights of residence in her chosen home, and any further legal harassment of her person or her settlement by the Whitfield family would be treated as interference with a territorial order and prosecuted accordingly. Ferris Whitfield, when informed of this by his own lawyer, reportedly said nothing. Colt Whitfield, by the account of the same bunkhouse men who kept their own record of the family's movements, sat for a long time on the porch of the ranch house that evening and looked at the eastern distance, toward the canyon country, and then went inside and did not come back out. Zara and Ellen rode back to Tsaya Canyon in 3 days, taking turns on the paint mare and the second horse, sleeping under open sky and talking in ways they had not had time for before, about Amaya, about Colt, about what grief does to a person over the long distance of years, about the children, about what they wanted the next year to look like, and the year after that. These conversations were not easy, but they were real in the way that only Conversations between people who have stopped protecting themselves from each other can be. Elon talked about Amaya with a directness and love that did not diminish or apologize for itself, and Zara listened without jealousy, because she had learned in months of canyon life that love does not diminish by being divided. It multiplies, it finds new rooms. It does not have to be reclaimed from the dead to be given to the living. She talked about the 3 years in the Whitfield house and the yellow dress she had sewn and put away, and the night Colt had walked out after she told him, and Elon listened with the same absolute quality of attention he gave everything. The desert rolled past them, red and gold and enormous. The settlement saw them coming from half a mile away, and the children came running before the horses reached the canyon entrance. Keo and Selah arrived first, breathless and grabbing one for each of her legs before she had fully dismounted. Chato came at a walk, as befitted his dignity, but the walk was very fast. He stopped in front of her and looked up at her with his serious, unguarded face, and said, with the abruptness of someone who has been practicing a sentence and has decided to just say it, "I am glad you came back. I was not certain you would." Zara crouched down to his level, the way Elon had crouched to hers in the desert, putting herself at eye level with the thing that mattered. "Chato," she said, "I live here. This is where I live now." He looked at her face for a long count of 3, checking it for truth the way a man checks rope for phrase before trusting it with weight. Then he nodded once, with the finality of something decided. He did not hug her, but he walked beside her all the way to the fire, close enough that his shoulder brushed her arm, and did not move away. Nali had made a meal, a real one, ambitious and warm, with the help of Daha and Lena, and the settlement ate together in the eye. Canyon evening with the fire going and the stars coming out overhead and the red walls turning from gold to purple to the deep black red of full night. Zara sat between Elon and the twins and ate and listened to the sounds of the settlement and felt, all the way down through all the layers of the last year, the 3 dry years, the shovels, the ground, the desert, the canyon, the children, the clerk, and the judge, and the Whitfield parlor, and all of it, felt underneath all of it the thing that had survived. Not hope exactly, something tougher than hope. Some essential refusal in her to be made small enough to fit inside someone else's idea of what she was worth. That refusal had been there before the desert, and the desert had not killed it, and the dirt had not killed it, and neither had the years. It had been there all along, buried so deep she had not always known it, waiting to be dug out. Later, when the children were sleeping, Elon and Zara sat beside the dying fire in the canyon dark. The stream made its small sound. The stars were thick enough to cast a kind of light on the canyon walls, the same walls that Chato believed remembered everything that happened in front of them. Zara looked at those walls for a long time. She thought about what they had seen this past year, a woman buried, a man with a shovel, 4 children learning to trust again, a settlement that held its ground. She thought about what it means to be put underground and to grow anyway, like a seed that does not know it was supposed to stay buried. She thought about Dorothea's words, "Dry wells get filled in." She thought about how wrong a person could be about another person. She was not a dry well. She had never been a dry well. She was something else entirely, something that needed the right soil, the right hands, the right ground to stand in, and had simply not had them until now. Elon reached over in the dark without looking at her and put his hand over hers on the canyon floor, and she turned her hand over and held it, and the fire went down to coals, and the canyon kept its watch, and the night was quiet in all the ways that quiet can be both peaceful and full. She would plant a garden in the spring. She had already decided. Near the stream, where the ground was softer and the canyon wall would catch the morning light. She would grow the things that grew best in dry, difficult places, the plants that knew how to find water deep underground, how to push through cracked earth, how to survive seasons that had no business being survived. She had asked Daha about the planting, what grew here, what the canyon soil would hold, and Daha had described plants Zara did not know yet but would learn. And one morning in that coming spring, she knew she would be on her knees in the red dirt with Keo and Sella on either side of her, pushing seeds into the earth with their small, serious fingers. And Chado would be nearby doing something useful and pretending not to. Watch, and Nali would be cataloging the process with her clear, observing eyes. And Elan would ride in from the canyon approach and dismount with his particular economical grace and come to see what they were doing. And she would look up from the ground that was hers now, the ground she had chosen and been chosen by. And the canyon walls would hold the moment the way they held every moment in their ancient red memory, permanent and true. She had been buried in the earth, and the earth had given her back. She intended to give it something worth keeping.